The first time Kai's mouth almost touched mine, it was raining so hard we couldn't hear each other breathe. My back was pressed against the cold brick of his apartment building, his hand flat against the wall beside my head, and for 3 full seconds neither of us moved. "Say something," he whispered, so close I could feel the words more than hear them. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. Because in that moment, I realized I had been in love with my best friend for exactly 1 year, 4 months, and 6 days, and I had never once let myself admit it out loud. That night changed everything. But to understand how we got there, you have to go back to the beginning, back to the ordinary Tuesday afternoon when Kai Whitlock walked into my life and quietly rearranged it without asking permission. My name is Eli Marsh, and for most of my life I believed I understood exactly who I was. I was 20 years old, studying graphic design at a mid-sized university in a town that smelled like rain and old coffee shops, and I had built my identity carefully, like a house with all the right rooms and none of the wrong doors. I liked structure. I liked knowing what came next. I did not like surprises. Kai was a surprise. He showed up in my design history seminar 3 weeks into the semester, dropping into the seat beside mine like he'd been sitting there all along. He had messy dark hair that always looked like he'd just gotten out of bed, a canvas jacket with a torn pocket, and the kind of easy, unbothered smile that made professors forgive him for being late. I remember glancing at him sideways and thinking, this guy is going to be a distraction. I had no idea how right I was. "You're the one who redid the whole layout for the design showcase last year," he said, not as a question, just a statement, like he'd already decided he knew things about me. I saw the poster in the hallway. It was better than anything the seniors made. I didn't know how to respond to that kind of directness. Most people worked up to compliments slowly, testing the water. Kai just waded straight in, fully clothed, like the awkwardness of it didn't register to him at all. "Thanks," I managed. "I didn't think anyone noticed." "I noticed things," he said, and then he grinned, like it was a joke only he understood, and turned back to his notebook. For weeks after that, he sat beside me without asking, like the seat had quietly become his. We started as project partners out of necessity. The professor paired us for a semester-long branding assignment, and what should have been 4 months of mild academic cooperation turned into something else almost immediately. We worked late in the library, arguing over typefaces and color palettes, and somewhere between the 5th and 6th argument I realized I looked forward to seeing him more than I looked forward to anything else in my week. Kai had a way of talking that made ordinary conversations feel important. He asked questions nobody else asked, not "how's it going" but "what's the last thing that actually surprised you?" He listened like your answer mattered, leaning forward slightly, elbows on the table, eyes steady in a way that made you feel like the only person in the room. I told myself it was just his personality. I told myself a lot of things that year that weren't quite true. We became close in the effortless way some friendships form, without a clear beginning, just an accumulation of hours spent together until one day you look up and realize this person has become necessary. We ate lunch together most days. We texted about nothing, a song, a meme, a bad grade, a stray dog we both saw on the same street corner 3 days in a row. He started calling me Marsh instead of Eli, and I started noticing the specific, particular sound of his laugh in a crowded room, picking it out instantly the way you recognize your own name. I didn't think about what any of it meant. Not yet. There's a particular kind of blindness that comes from not wanting to see something. I had grown up in a house where certain feelings were never spoken about, where different was a word used carefully, if at all. I had learned early to keep my curiosity folded up small, tucked away where no one, including myself, could examine it too closely. So when my chest tightened every time Kai smiled at me like I was the funniest, most interesting person he'd ever met, I called it friendship. When I found myself replaying our conversations at 2 in the morning, turning his words over like stones in my palm, I called it nothing at all. It was easier that way. For a while. The first real crack in that careful denial came on a Thursday night in October, 3 months into knowing him. We were sitting on the roof of his apartment building, his favorite place, a flat concrete ledge that overlooked the parking lot and, if you angled yourself right, a sliver of the city skyline in the distance. He'd brought 2 cans of soda and a blanket that smelled like his detergent, and we sat close together because the night had turned cold faster than either of us expected. "Can I tell you something weird?" he asked, staring out at the lights instead of at me. "Always," I said. "Sometimes I feel like I've known you longer than I actually have. Like we're already halfway through some story and I just don't remember the beginning." He laughed a little, like he was embarrassed by his own honesty. "That's insane, right? We met, 3 months ago?" I didn't laugh with him. Something in my chest had gone very still and very loud at the same time, an odd combination I didn't have a name for yet. "It's not insane," I said quietly. "I feel it too." He looked at me then, really looked, in that steady, searching way he had, and for a moment neither of us said anything. The wind moved between us, cold and quick, and I remember thinking, with a kind of panic I didn't understand, that I wanted to close the distance between our shoulders and never have to explain why. I didn't. Not that night. But something had shifted, some invisible line had been crossed, and even though neither of us named it, I think we both felt it settle into the space between us like a held breath. The weeks after that rooftop night moved differently. Not faster, exactly, but heavier, like every ordinary moment we shared now carried a second, quieter meaning underneath the first. I noticed things about Kai I hadn't let myself notice before, the way he chewed the end of his pen when he was thinking, the small scar above his eyebrow he got falling off a bike at 11 years old, the way his voice dropped half an octave when he was being sincere instead of funny. I noticed, and I filed it all away in some private drawer I didn't examine too closely, because examining it meant asking questions I wasn't ready to answer. We kept our routines. Wednesday nights were for the campus coffee shop, where he always ordered the same overly sweet caramel drink and mocked me for drinking my coffee black like a disappointed dad. Saturday afternoons, when neither of us had anywhere better to be, we wandered through the second-hand bookstore 2 blocks from campus, not really looking for anything, just enjoying the quiet company of shelves and dust and each other. It was during one of those Saturday wanderings that Priya, a mutual friend from our design cohort, said something that cracked the foundation a little further. We'd run into her by accident near the poetry section, and after a few minutes of small talk, she looked between the two of us with an expression I couldn't quite place. "You two are honestly the most married non-married people I've ever met," she said, half laughing. "Do you realize you finish each other's sentences?" Kai laughed it off easily, the way he laughed off most things, but I felt heat climb up my neck and prayed it didn't show on my face. "We're just close," I said, too quickly, and Priya raised an eyebrow like she didn't quite believe me, but let it go. Later that night, lying in bed with my phone propped on my chest, a text came in from Kai. "Do you think Priya's right about the finishing sentences thing?" I stared at it for a long time before answering. "Maybe. We do spend a lot of time together." "I don't mind it," he wrote back. "Just so you know." I didn't know what to do with that sentence. It sat in my chest like a stone dropped into still water, sending ripples outward that I couldn't stop. I typed 3 different responses and deleted all of them before finally settling on something safe: "Me neither." It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the whole truth either. The whole truth was that I had started to notice the particular ache that came from wanting to be near someone all the time, a low, persistent hum underneath every normal interaction. The whole truth was that I had started comparing every other person I met to him, and no one measured up. The whole truth was something I still wasn't ready to say, even to myself, even in the privacy of my own head at midnight. There was a girl in my design elective, Naomi, kind and funny, who made it clear in small ways that she was interested in more than friendship. She left little notes in my sketchbook, laughed a beat too long at my jokes, found reasons to sit beside me. Under different circumstances, I think I might have tried. She was easy to talk to, uncomplicated in a way that felt almost like relief. But whenever I imagined actually being with her, holding her hand, leaning in to kiss her, the picture in my mind refused to hold together. It kept dissolving into something else entirely, into dark hair and a crooked grin and a voice that dropped low when it meant something. I told myself that meant nothing. I told myself a lot of things. Kai noticed Naomi too, in his own way. She likes you, he said one afternoon, watching her walk away after she'd stopped by our table to ask about a group project. His voice was casual, almost too casual, like he was working hard to keep it light. You should ask her out. Maybe, I said, watching his face instead of hers retreating figure. Something flickered behind his eyes, dawned so fast I almost convinced myself I'd imagined it, but for half a second, I could have sworn it looked like disappointment. You don't sound very excited, he said. I don't know, I admitted, which was as close to the truth as I could manage. I guess I'm just not thinking about it. He didn't push, but he got quiet for the rest of that afternoon, quieter than usual, answering my questions in short sentences instead of his usual rambling tangents. I didn't understand it then. I understand it now. That was the pattern of those months, two people circling something neither of us could name, drawing closer and then flinching back, testing the edges of a feeling too big and too frightening to hold directly. We were best friends who had started, without either of us saying so, to mean something more dangerous to each other. And like most dangerous things, it grew slowly, in the dark, waiting for the moment it could no longer be ignored. That moment came on a night neither of us expected, in the middle of an ordinary study session that turned into something neither of us walked away from unchanged. It was late November, and the study session was supposed to be simple, a few hours reviewing our final branding project before the deadline, pizza boxes stacked on Kai's small kitchen table, music playing low from a speaker balanced on the windowsill. I remember the specific quality of that evening, the way the light outside had turned the color of a bruise, gray-blue and heavy, long before the rain actually started. We'd been working for almost 3 hours when Kai finally leaned back in his chair and rubbed his eyes. I need a break, he said. My brain has officially turned into oatmeal. Your brain was always oatmeal, I said, and he threw a balled-up napkin at my head, laughing in that unguarded way that always made something in my chest loosen. We ended up on the couch instead of at the table, laptops abandoned, the movie we put on forgotten within the first 10 minutes because we were too busy talking over it. That was how most of our nights went, plans that dissolved into conversation, agendas that gave way to whatever we actually wanted to say to each other. I loved those nights more than I let myself admit. I loved the way time seemed to stretch and soften around us, like the rest of the world had quietly agreed to wait. At some point, the conversation drifted somewhere neither of us had taken it before. Kai was talking about his older brother, about the pressure of a family that expected certain things from him, a certain kind of life, a certain kind of future, a certain kind of person to bring home one day. His voice had lost its usual lightness, gone thin and careful in a way I wasn't used to hearing. Do you ever feel like you're only showing people half of yourself? He asked, not quite looking at me, focused instead on a loose thread on the couch cushion. Like there's a whole part you keep locked up because you're scared of what happens if you let it out. The question landed somewhere deep in my chest, somewhere I hadn't let anyone touch before. Yeah, I said quietly, before I could stop myself. Every day, actually. He looked up at that, something sharpening in his expression, a kind of attention that made the room feel smaller. What's yours? He asked. The part you keep locked up. I don't know what made me almost answer honestly that night. Maybe it was the rain that had started tapping against the window, soft and insistent, wrapping the apartment in its own private quiet. Maybe it was the low light, or the exhaustion, or the fact that some walls only hold up for so long before the pressure behind them becomes too much. Whatever it was, I felt the truth rising in my throat, dangerous and unstoppable, before I managed to swallow it back down. I don't know if I'm ready to say it, I admitted instead, which was as close to the truth as I could get. Kai nodded slowly, like he understood exactly what that meant, like maybe he was carrying something similar. That's fair, he said. I'm not sure I am either. Then, quieter, but I think you already know mine. Or you're starting to. The air between us had changed by then, thickened into something I didn't have language for. We were sitting closer than we had been a few minutes earlier, though I couldn't have said which of us moved first. His knee was against mine, warm through the fabric of his jeans, and neither of us pulled away. "Kai," I said, and his name came out sounding like a question I didn't know how to finish. "Yeah." His voice had dropped to almost a whisper. I don't know what I would have said next, because that was the moment his phone buzzed loudly against the coffee table, shattering whatever fragile thing had been building between us. He glanced at it, sighed, and the moment folded back into ordinary time. "I should probably head out soon anyway, it's getting late," I said, though neither of us actually moved for another 20 minutes. When I finally did leave, the rain had turned heavier, and Kai walked me down to the building's entrance with an umbrella neither of us really needed since we were both already soaked through by the time we reached the door. That's when it happened, the moment that would replay in my mind for weeks afterward, the moment everything shifted from careful denial into something neither of us could take back. We were standing under the narrow awning outside his building, rain hammering down just past the edge of the roofline, and Kai turned to say goodnight. Whatever he'd been about to say died somewhere in his throat. I watched it happen, watched the words disappear, watched his eyes drop briefly to my mouth and then back up to my eyes, watched something in his expression crack open like a window finally unlatched after being painted shut for years. "Say something," he whispered, echoing words that would come to mean everything to me later. His hand came up, resting flat against the brick wall beside my head, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating off his skin even through the cold night air. My heart was slamming against my ribs so hard I was sure he could hear it. Neither of us moved for 3 long seconds. 3 seconds that felt like the entire length of a year compressed down into something almost unbearable. I could have closed the distance. I wanted to close the distance so badly it physically hurt, a want so large it didn't feel like it could fit inside an ordinary body. But fear got there first, fear of what it would mean, fear of what I would have to admit once I could no longer pretend, fear of losing the one person who had become the center of my entire world if I got this wrong. "I have to go," I said instead, my voice cracking on the last word, and I stepped back before he could stop me, before I could stop myself. I didn't look back as I walked away into the rain. I didn't have to. I could feel his eyes on me the entire way down the block, and I knew, with a certainty that terrified me, that nothing between us would ever be simple again. I avoided him for 4 days after that. For days of unanswered texts left unread, for days of finding excuses not to be in the same room, for days of lying awake replaying those 3 seconds under the awning until I'd worn the memory smooth from handling it too much. I told myself I was protecting something, our friendship, my carefully constructed sense of who I was, the family I still hadn't found the courage to imagine having this conversation with. I told myself the distance was necessary, a controlled burn to stop something bigger from spreading out of control. What I didn't let myself think about was Kai, alone in his apartment, wondering what he'd done wrong. His text started out light, the way he always was, trying to coax me back into our usual rhythm. "You alive over there, Marsh?" Then, a day later, did I do something? And finally, on the 4th day, something that broke my heart in a way I wasn't prepared for, "I'm sorry." Whatever it was. I shouldn't have gotten that close. Can we just go back to normal? I stared at that message for almost an hour before I finally called him, because some apologies you can't answer with a text. "Hey," he said when he picked up, and his voice sounded smaller than I'd ever heard it, careful in a way that made my chest ache. "You didn't do anything wrong," I said. "I need you to know that. This isn't about you doing something wrong." "Then what is it about?" There was a long pause on his end, and I could picture him exactly, sitting on the edge of his bed, one hand pushed through his messy hair, the particular way he bit the inside of his cheek when he was nervous. "Because it feels like you're pulling away from me, Eli, and I don't know what I'm supposed to do with that." The use of my actual name instead of Marsh hit harder than I expected. He only used it when things were serious, when the joking had run out and there was nothing left but the truth underneath. "I'm scared," I admitted, the words coming out rough, unpracticed. "Of what I'm feeling. Of what it means. I've never let myself think about this before, and now I can't stop, and it terrifies me." Silence stretched between us, long enough that I thought the call might have dropped. Then, quietly, "What are you feeling, Eli?" I couldn't say it. Not yet. Not even with the safety of a phone line and several miles of distance between us. "I don't know if I can say it out loud yet," I said. "But I don't want to lose you over being too scared to figure it out. Can you give me some time? Please." "Take whatever time you need," he said, and I could hear something fracture slightly in his voice, something he was trying hard to hold together. "I'm not going anywhere. I just need you to know that whatever this is, I'm not scared of it. I haven't been for a while." Those words stayed with me long after we hung up, turning over and over in my mind like a stone I couldn't put down. "I'm not scared of it. I haven't been for a while." It meant he knew. It meant he'd probably known before I let myself admit it, and he'd been waiting, patiently, for me to catch up to something he'd already accepted about himself. The weeks that followed were strange, suspended in a careful, deliberate distance that neither of us fully wanted but both of us maintained. We still talked, but less. We still saw each other on campus, but the easy physical closeness we used to share, the shoulder bumps, the leaning in to see or scream, the casual arms slung around a neck, had disappeared, replaced by a careful, painful politeness that felt worse than silence. I threw myself into my classes, into extra shifts at the campus bookstore where I worked part-time, into anything that would keep my mind too busy to circle back to him. It didn't work. Everything reminded me of Kai, a song on the radio he'd once made fun of, a particular shade of blue that matched his favorite jacket, the smell of rain against pavement that instantly transported me back to that awning, to those 3 unbearable seconds. Naomi, sensing the distance I'd put up around myself, tried a few more times to close the gap between us, and for a moment, one weak, confused moment, I let myself consider it seriously. Maybe if I chose the easier path, the expected path, the feelings for Kai would fade into something manageable, something I could file away as a strange, temporary confusion. I agreed to get coffee with her one Thursday afternoon. It was a disaster, though not because of anything she did wrong. She was sweet, funny, genuinely interested in getting to know me. But I spent the entire hour distracted, checking my phone for a text that wasn't coming, comparing every pause in conversation to the easy rhythm I had with Kai and finding it lacking. When she finally, gently, asked if something was on my mind, I told her the truth as much as I could manage. "I think there's someone else. Not in a relationship way. Just someone I can't stop thinking about, and it's not fair to you if I'm sitting here wishing I was somewhere else." She took it better than I deserved. "For what it's worth," she said, gathering her things, "whoever they are, I hope you figure it out. You look happier when you talk about them. Even if you don't realize you're doing it." Her words followed me home that night, settling into the same drawer where I'd been keeping every uncomfortable truth I wasn't ready to examine. "You look happier when you talk about them." I thought about all the times I'd mentioned Kai without meaning to, weaving him into conversations that had nothing to do with him, unable to help it. I thought about the 3 seconds under the awning, and the phone call, and the particular ache of missing someone who was still, technically, only a few blocks away. I thought about it until I couldn't ignore it anymore. The break in our careful distance came from an unlikely place, a group camping trip that Priya had organized weeks earlier, before any of the tension between Kai and me had fully surfaced. By the time the weekend arrived, half the group had dropped out due to exams and family obligations, until it was down to just 3 of us, and then, at the last minute, Priya herself got pulled into a family emergency 2 states away, leaving only me and Kai standing awkwardly in a gravel parking lot beside a car packed with camping gear neither of us had the heart to unpack and go home. "We could still go," Kai said, not quite meeting my eyes, his hands shoved deep in his jacket pockets against the cold. "Or we could just call it off. Whatever you're comfortable with." I looked at him for a long moment, at the careful, guarded hope in his expression, the way he was trying so hard not to want this too visibly, and something in me, tired of running, finally decided to stop. "Let's go," I said. "It's already paid for." Seems like a waste not to. It was a 3-hour drive to the lake, and for the first hour neither of us said much, the radio filling the silence where conversation used to live so easily. Somewhere around the second hour, Kai reached over and turned the radio down. Can we talk? Actually talk, I mean. Not around it. Yeah, I said, gripping the steering wheel a little tighter. Okay. I'm not going to pretend I don't know what that night under the awning was, he said carefully, watching the road ahead instead of me, giving me the mercy of not having to hold his gaze while he said it. And I'm not going to pretend the distance since then hasn't hurt. But I also don't want to lose you as a friend, Eli, even if this is as far as it ever goes. I need you to know that. Whatever you decide, whatever you need, I'd rather have you as my best friend forever than push for something more and lose you completely. His words undid something in me I hadn't expected. Here he was, offering me an exit, a way to step back into the safety of ordinary friendship, and instead of relief, all I felt was a hollow, aching disappointment at the thought of taking it. What if I don't want the exit? I said quietly, the words slipping out before I'd fully decided to say them. Kai turned to look at me then, something careful and hopeful flickering behind his eyes. Then don't take it, he said simply. But you have to be sure, because I don't think I can survive getting close to this again and then watching you disappear a second time. I'm scared, I admitted, keeping my eyes on the road because it was easier than looking at him while I said it. Not of you. Of everything that comes with it. Of who I have to become to be honest about this. You don't have to become anyone, Kai said. You just have to stop pretending to be someone you're not. We arrived at the lake as the sun was beginning to dip low, painting the water in shades of orange and gold, and something about the quiet of that place, no one else around, no expectations, just the two of us in a tent we struggled comically to assemble together, loosened the last of the careful distance we'd been maintaining. We built a small fire as the light faded, sitting close together against the evening chill, and for the first time in weeks, the silence between us felt comfortable again instead of strained. Can I tell you something I've never told anyone? Kai said, staring into the flames instead of at me. I came out to myself when I was 16. Took me 2 more years to tell my parents. I spent those 2 years terrified that admitting it would cost me everything, my family, the future I thought I was supposed to have, the version of myself I thought everyone expected. And then I told them, and it was hard, and there were hard conversations after, but I survived it. I'm still here. Still myself, just, finally, actually myself, instead of a performance of who I thought I had to be. How did you know it was worth the risk? I asked, watching the firelight flicker across his face. Because the alternative was spending my whole life pretending, he said. And pretending is exhausting in a way that never really lets up. I got tired of being tired, Eli. That's really all it was. I thought about those words for a long time that night, lying in the small tent beside him, close enough to feel the warmth of him even through 2 separate sleeping bags, listening to his breathing even out into sleep while my own mind refused to quiet down. Somewhere around 2 in the morning, unable to sleep, I finally whispered into the dark, not even sure if he was awake to hear it, I think I'm tired of pretending too. I felt him shift beside me, and realized he had been awake the whole time. Then stop, he said softly, his hand finding mine in the dark, fingers lacing together with a gentleness that made my chest ache. Whenever you're ready. Not for me. For you. We didn't kiss that weekend. We didn't need to, something else had happened instead, something quieter and maybe more important, the beginning of real trust, the kind that doesn't need to rush toward anything because it already knows it has time. We drove home on Sunday with the radio playing softly between us, and for the first time since the night under the awning, I felt like whatever this was between us might actually survive long enough to become something real. It was 3 weeks after that trip that I saw the photo of Kai and Theo at the party, and everything I thought I'd learned about trust got tested all over again. 3 weeks into our careful distance, I ran into Kai at a party neither of us really wanted to attend. It was hosted by a mutual friend from our cohort, one of those loud, crowded apartment gatherings with string lights taped haphazardly to the ceiling and music too loud for actual conversation. I almost didn't go. I'm still not sure what made me change my mind, except that some part of me, the part one was still learning to listen to, wanted, desperately, to see him. He was there when I arrived, leaning against the kitchen counter with a drink in his hand, laughing at something a guy named Theo was saying. Theo was tall, confident, the kind of easy charm that came from never once doubting himself, and he had his hand resting lightly on Kai's forearm in a way that made something ugly and unfamiliar twist in my stomach. I stood in the doorway for a full minute before Kai noticed me. When he did, something shifted across his face, surprise, then something warmer, something he tried and failed to hide fast enough. "Hey," he said, straightening slightly, putting a few inches of distance between himself and Theo that I noticed more than I should have. "You came. Didn't want to be the only one from our group not here," I said, which was a lie, and judging by the look on his face, he knew it. Theo introduced himself with the easy confidence of someone used to being liked, and for the next 20 minutes I watched him talk to Kai with a kind of low-grade panic building in my chest that I didn't have a name for yet, not really, though some part of me understood exactly what it was. Jealousy. Ugly, unfamiliar, entirely unwelcome jealousy, curling through me every time Theo made Kai laugh, every time he leaned in a little too close to be heard over the music. I told myself I had no right to feel this way. We weren't together. We weren't anything, not really, just two people circling something we'd both been too afraid to name. But logic didn't seem to matter to whatever was happening in my chest, tightening with every passing minute, until I found myself stepping outside onto the small balcony just to get air that didn't feel so thick with things I couldn't say. Kai found me there a few minutes later, alone, staring out at the parking lot without really seeing it. "You okay?" he asked, closing the sliding door behind him, muting the party noise to a low hum. "Fine," I said, too quickly, the same lie I always reached for when the truth was too complicated. He studied me for a moment, and I watched something click into place behind his eyes, some understanding he'd arrived at without me having to say a single true word. "You're jealous," he said, not unkindly, almost gently, like he was handing me back something I'd dropped. "I'm not," I started, and then stopped, because there wasn't any point in finishing that sentence when we both already knew it was a lie. "Eli." He said my name softly this time, stepping closer, close enough that the cold night air between us seemed to shrink to almost nothing. "You've had 3 weeks to figure out what you're feeling. I've been trying to give you space because I thought that's what you needed. But I need you to know something, and I need you to actually hear it this time instead of running." My heart was pounding so loudly I was sure he could hear it over the muffled bass from inside. "Okay," I said, barely above a whisper. "There's no Theo," he said. "There's no anyone else. There hasn't been, not since the day I sat down next to you in that seminar and you looked at me like I'd already interrupted something important. I've been waiting for you, Eli. Not patiently, exactly, it's been the least patient 3 weeks of my entire life, but I've been waiting, because I know this is hard for you in ways it maybe isn't for me. I made peace with who I am a long time ago. I know that's not true for you yet. But I need you to know I'm not going anywhere, and I need you to stop pretending you don't feel what I know you feel." I stood there, the cold air biting at my skin, the sound of the party a distant hum behind us, and for the first time in 3 weeks I let myself actually look at him, really look, the way he always looked at me, like nothing else in the world existed. "I don't know how to do this," I admitted, my voice cracking on the words. "I don't know how to be the person who feels this, and also the person my family expects, and also just, myself. I don't know how to hold all of that at once." "You don't have to know how yet," Kai said, closing the last of the distance between us until I could feel the warmth of him even through my jacket. "You just have to stop running from it long enough to figure it out. And you don't have to figure it out alone. I don't know which one of us moved first. Maybe it doesn't matter. What I remember is the particular hush of that balcony, the party noise fading into something distant and unimportant, and the way his hand found mine, fingers lacing together like they'd been waiting all along for exactly this moment. We didn't kiss that night. Not yet. But something settled between us, an understanding, fragile and new, that whatever this was, we were no longer facing it alone. I need time, I said quietly, my forehead nearly resting against his. Not to decide if I feel this. I already know I do. Time to figure out how to tell the people who matter. My parents. Myself, honestly, in a way I actually believe. Take the time, Kai murmured. I'll be here. He was. That was the thing about Kai I would come to understand more and more over the following months. He said things he meant, and he meant the things he said, and there was a particular kind of safety in that, a safety I hadn't realized I'd been starving for until I finally had it. The weeks that followed were softer than the ones before them, but not without their own particular ache. Kai and I found our way back to each other slowly, rebuilding the easy closeness we'd lost, except now it carried an undercurrent neither of us bothered to hide anymore. Our hands found each other more often, brief touches at first, testing, then longer, more certain. We sat closer on his couch than the movie playing ever required. We stood a little too near each other in doorways, letting the moment stretch before either of us stepped back. But we hadn't kissed. Not really, not fully, just that almost moment under the awning, and something in me kept circling back to it, wondering what it would have meant if I'd been brave enough to close that final distance. The hardest part wasn't Kai. The hardest part was everything outside of Kai, the version of myself I'd built my whole life around, the assumptions my family carried about who I would become, the quiet, persistent fear that admitting this out loud would cost me things I wasn't ready to lose. I hadn't told anyone yet. Not Priya, who I suspected already knew in the intuitive way close friends sometimes do. Not my parents, who called every Sunday expecting updates about classes and internships and a future that had always been drawn in careful, predictable lines. Kai never pushed. That was, perhaps, the thing that undid me most completely, the patience he offered without ever making it feel like an obligation I owed him. You come out when you're ready, he told me one evening, both of us lying on his bedroom floor, staring at the ceiling because it felt easier to talk that way, without having to watch each other's faces. Not before. Not for me. Not for anyone. What if I'm never ready? I asked, the fear finally spilling out into words. What if I spend my whole life almost saying it and never actually manage to? Kai was quiet for a long moment before he answered. Then I'll still be here, he said. However long that takes. But Eli, I don't think you're the kind of person who stays almost anything forever. You just need a reason big enough to be brave for. I turned my head to look at him, and he was already looking at me, the way he always was, patient and steady and entirely unafraid. What if you're my reason? I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them, more honest than anything I'd said out loud in months. Something in his expression cracked open, soft and vulnerable in a way I rarely saw from him. Then I hope I'm a good enough one, he said quietly. That was the night I finally told Priya. Not Kai directly, I needed to practice saying it to someone first, someone who wasn't the reason the words mattered so much. I called her from the quiet of my own room, my heart hammering so hard I thought I might be sick, and I said the sentence I'd been avoiding for months, I think I'm falling in love with Kai. There was a pause on the line, and then, gently, Eli, honey, I've known that since October. I've just been waiting for you to catch up. Her laughter, warm and unsurprised, broke something loose in my chest that I hadn't realized I'd been holding so tightly. You're not, this doesn't change anything. Between us, I mean. Why would it? She said, like the question genuinely confused her. You're still you. You're just a version of you that's finally being honest. That's not a bad thing, Eli. That's the best thing. I hung up the phone that night feeling lighter than I had in months, like some enormous weight I'd been carrying without realizing it had finally been set down. But there was still the harder conversation waiting, the one with my parents, the one that felt like it could unravel everything I thought I knew about my place in my own family. I wasn't ready for that conversation yet. Not fully. But for the first time, I believed I might get there eventually. And having Kai beside me, patient, steady, unwavering, made the distance between where I was and where I needed to be feel, for the first time, like something survivable. A week after I told Priya, Kai invited me to his cousin's birthday dinner, a small, loud, affectionate gathering of his extended family at his aunt's house across town. "You don't have to," he said carefully, watching my face for hesitation. "I know it's a lot, meeting people before you've even told your own parents. I wanted you to see what it looks like on the other side. What it looks like when it's already settled." I went, nervous in a way I hadn't expected, half convinced I would spend the whole evening as an obvious outsider, the friend nobody quite knew how to introduce. Instead, Kai's aunt greeted me at the door with a hug like I'd been coming to these dinners for years, and his younger cousin immediately dragged me into an argument about a video game I'd never played, and somewhere in the noise and the too much food and the easy, unguarded laughter, I realized nobody in that house treated Kai's being gay as a topic requiring careful handling. It simply was, the same unremarkable fact as his height or his terrible taste in socks. They didn't always get it right, Kai told me later, driving me home with the windows cracked to let out the heat of the crowded house. My uncle needed almost a year before he stopped changing the subject every time it came up. My grandmother cried, but not the way you'd think. She cried because she was scared for me, scared of a world that isn't always kind to people like us. It took time. It took me being patient with them the same way I've had to be patient with you. But eventually, it just became normal. Nobody in there tonight was performing acceptance for your benefit. That's just who they are now. I don't know if my family will ever get there, I admitted, watching the streetlights slide past the window. Maybe not on the first conversation, Kai said. Maybe not on the 10th. But Eli, most people who love you find their way to acceptance eventually, even if the road there is messier than either of you would like. You don't have to know the ending before you're brave enough to start. I held on to those words longer than I let on, turning them over during the quiet, uncertain weeks that followed, weeks where I rehearsed the sentence "I'm gay and I'm in love with someone" in my head so many times it started to lose its shape, became just sounds instead of a truth I was terrified to speak aloud. I wasn't ready yet. But for the first time, meeting the warmth of Kai's family, easy and unremarkable and entirely unafraid, I let myself believe that a version of that same warmth might eventually exist in my own home too. It was that same fragile, hard-won hope that made the misunderstanding with Theo's photo sting so much worse when it came. Because for the first time in months, I had let myself imagine a future solid enough to protect, and the fear of losing it, however irrational, cut deeper than it would have a few months earlier. If our story had been simple, it would have ended there, two people slowly finding their way toward each other, patient and certain. But nothing worth having comes without at least one moment where everything nearly falls apart, and ours came in the middle of December, 3 days before winter break, when a misunderstanding neither of us saw coming threatened to undo months of careful, hard-won trust. It started with a photo. Kai had gone home for a family engagement, his cousin's engagement party, 3 hours away, and Theo, the same easy, confident guy from the party weeks earlier, had apparently been invited too, some connection through mutual family friends neither of us had known about. Priya saw a photo posted online, Kai and Theo, standing close together at the edge of a crowded reception hall, both laughing at something outside the frame. She didn't mean any harm showing it to me, she thought I already knew, thought it was just a funny coincidence worth mentioning. But something ugly and irrational bloomed in my chest the moment I saw it, jealousy dressed up as certainty, whispering all the worst possible explanations before I'd bothered to ask for the real one. I didn't call Kai that night. I told myself I was giving him space to enjoy his family event, but the truth was smaller and uglier than that. I was afraid of what I might hear if I asked, afraid of confirming some fear I'd been quietly carrying since the moment I first saw Theo's hand on his arm. So I said nothing, and the silence stretched between us for 2 full days, filled only by his usual easy texts that I answered in clipped, distant sentences, watching my own cruelty from a strange distance without fully understanding why I was doing it. Kai noticed, of course. He always noticed. Did I do something again? He texted on the second night, and I could hear the exhaustion in it even through the small screen. the particular weariness of someone who kept reaching for a hand that kept pulling away. Saw the photo with Theo, I finally wrote back, hating how small and petty the words looked once I'd sent them. His response came almost immediately, and I could feel the frustration in it even through text. That's what this is about. Eli, he's my cousin's fiancé's brother. We talked for 10 minutes about his job. Is this seriously what 3 weeks of trust turns into the second I'm 3 hours away? Reading it back now, I understand how unfair I was being, how quickly fear had curdled into something that looked a lot like accusation. But in the moment, all I could feel was the sharp, unreasonable sting of being caught in my own insecurity, and instead of apologizing, I did what scared people often do, I dug in harder. Forget it, I wrote. It doesn't matter. It clearly does, Kai wrote back, or you wouldn't have gone quiet for 2 days instead of just asking me. He wasn't wrong, and some small, honest part of me knew it even as I fought against admitting it. We didn't speak again until he got back from break, and when he did, the easy warmth between us had gone brittle, replaced by something careful and hurt on both sides. We sat across from each other at our usual coffee shop table, and for the first time since the seminar 3 months earlier, the silence between us didn't feel comfortable at all. I'm sorry, I finally said, because someone had to say it first, and I understood, watching his tired, guarded expression, that it needed to be me. I let something small turn into something big because I was scared, and instead of talking to you about it, I punished you for a fear that was mine to deal with, not yours. Kai turned his cup slowly on the table, not quite looking at me. Do you know how it felt, he said quietly, spending 3 days wondering if you were pulling away again, the way you did before? I told myself I'd wait as long as you needed. But it's hard, Eli, watching someone I care about disappear every time something scares them, and never knowing if this time they're coming back. His words landed harder than any anger could have. I know, I said. And I'm not asking you to just accept it. I'm telling you I see it now, the pattern, what I do when I'm scared. I don't want to keep doing that to you. To us. He finally looked up, something cautious but hopeful flickering across his face. Us, he repeated softly, like the word itself was new and fragile and worth handling carefully. Us, I confirmed. If you'll still have me, after I've spent half this semester running from something I already know is true. For a long moment, he said nothing, just studied me across the small table, like he was deciding something important. Then, slowly, his hand slid across the surface until it found mine, fingers curling around it with the same certainty I remembered from the balcony weeks before. I've never once stopped wanting this, he said. I just needed you to stop being afraid of wanting it too. That reconciliation didn't erase everything. Trust, once shaken, takes time to fully settle again, but it cleared the ground for something neither of us had been brave enough to attempt yet, complete honesty, without hedging, without the safety of ambiguity to retreat into if things went wrong. It happened on the last night before winter break, back on the same rooftop where everything had first quietly shifted months earlier. The city stretched out below us, lit up gold and distant, and the air had that particular sharp, clean cold that comes right before the first real snow of the season. We sat close together under the same blanket from that October night, though everything about the space between us felt different now, less careful, less guarded, charged instead with a kind of quiet anticipation that made my pulse feel loud in my own ears. I told Priya, I said, breaking the comfortable silence between us. About us. About how I feel. Kai turned to look at me, something soft and unguarded crossing his face. How'd that go? She said she'd known since October. I laughed a little, surprising myself with how easy it felt now to say these things out loud. She said I was just the last one to catch up. She's not wrong, Kai said, a small smile pulling at the corner of his mouth. I think I knew the day you told me my design critique was, and I quote, annoyingly correct. I went home that night and told my roommate I'd met someone who was going to be a problem for me. A problem, I repeated, raising an eyebrow. The best kind, he said. The kind you can't stop thinking about, even when you're actively trying to. We sat with that for a moment, the honesty settling comfortably between us instead of the fear it once carried. Then, quietly, I said the thing I'd been building toward for months, the thing I'd almost said a dozen times and lost my nerve at the last second every single time. I love you, Kai. I don't know exactly when it started, but I know it's true, and I'm done being scared of saying it. The words hung in the cold night air between us, fragile and enormous all at once. Kai's expression shifted through something complicated, surprise, relief, a kind of raw vulnerability I'd rarely seen him allow himself. Say that again, he said softly, his voice unsteady in a way I'd never heard from him before. I love you, I said again, steadier this time, letting the truth of it settle into my own chest like it had always belonged there. I've loved you since the seminar, Kai admitted, his voice barely above a whisper now, like the words were too precious to say any louder. I've loved you through every excuse you made to avoid saying it, through every scared, complicated version of yourself you thought you had to hide from me. I would have waited as long as it took, Eli. I need you to know that. But I'm so glad I don't have to wait anymore. There, on that rooftop, under a sky just beginning to release its first snow of the season, months of careful denial and quiet longing finally gave way to something neither of us fought against anymore. His hand came up to my face, gentle, certain, and this time, when the distance between us closed, neither of us pulled back. What happened next belongs only to the two of us, a moment quiet and complete, the culmination of months spent circling something too big to name until it could no longer be avoided. When we finally broke apart, snow had started falling in earnest, catching in his dark hair, and he was looking at me like I was the only thing in the entire world worth looking at. So, he said, a little breathless, a little dazed, the familiar teasing lightness creeping back into his voice even through the emotion still thick in the air. Was that worth the wait? Every single second, I said, and pulled him back toward me before either of us could say anything else. Telling my parents took longer than telling Priya, longer than admitting it to myself, longer even than that first rooftop kiss beneath the falling snow. It happened over spring break, in the quiet of our kitchen table, my hands shaking around a mug of tea I didn't actually want, my mother's face carefully unreadable as I finally said the words I'd been circling for years without realizing it, I'm gay. And I'm in love with someone. His name is Kai. The silence that followed felt endless, the particular held-breath silence of a moment that could go any number of directions. My father was the one who spoke first, his voice rough but steady. Does he make you happy? More than I knew I could be, I said, my voice cracking on the honesty of it. Then that's what matters, he said simply, and reached across the table to squeeze my hand, and something in my chest that had been braced for years finally, quietly, let go. It wasn't perfect. There were harder conversations after that, questions that took time and patience to work through, an adjustment period none of us expected to need but all of us moved through together, slowly, imperfectly, but with love steady underneath all of it. My mother cried, not from disappointment, she told me later, but from realizing how long I must have carried this alone, how much of myself I'd hidden out of fear of exactly this moment. I wish you'd trusted us sooner, she said, and I understood, finally, that the fear had always been mine to overcome, not theirs to prove. Kai met them for the first time 2 months later, over an awkward, wonderful dinner full of too many questions and too much laughter, and by the end of the night my father was asking him about his design portfolio like they'd known each other for years. Watching the two most important parts of my life finally exist in the same room, without the fear I'd carried for so long standing between them, felt like something I'd never quite let myself imagine was possible. It's been almost a year now since that night on the rooftop. Kai and I moved into a small apartment together at the start of this semester, nothing fancy, a cramped 2-bedroom with a leaking faucet neither of us has fixed yet, but it's ours, filled with the same easy warmth that first drew me to him in that seminar so long ago. We still argue about typefaces. He still calls me Marsh when he's being affectionate and Eli when things are serious. I still notice the small scar above his eyebrow every single time he laughs, and I still feel that same tightening in my chest, except now it isn't fear. It's just love, plain and steady and entirely mine to claim. Things were not always easy after that. I want to be honest about that, because the version of love that only exists in the good moments isn't the kind worth telling. 6 months into officially being together, after the parents, after the friends, after the slow, steady work of building us in the open instead of in careful, guarded secrecy, Kai got an email that nearly unraveled everything we'd built. It was a job offer, a genuinely incredible one, from a design studio in a city 8 hours away, the kind of opportunity he'd been quietly hoping for since before we'd even met. He came home that evening holding his laptop like it might combust, equal parts thrilled and sick with the weight of what accepting it might mean. "I don't know what to do," he admitted, sitting across from me at our small kitchen table, the offer letter open between us like something that might bite. "This is everything I've wanted professionally. And it's 8 hours away from everything I actually want personally. I don't know how to hold both of those at once." I felt the old fear rise in my chest, not fear of my own identity this time, but a newer, sharper fear of losing the steady, hard-won thing we'd built together. "Take it," I heard myself say, before I'd fully decided I meant it. "You can't turn down your dream because you're scared of what it costs us. We'll figure out the rest." "Will we?" Kai asked, searching my face for the truth underneath the brave words. "Because long distance is hard, Eli, and we've only just gotten good at being close. I don't want to trade one kind of fear for another." We talked long into that night, honestly, without the easy deflection we might have used months earlier, weighing what we actually wanted against what we thought we were supposed to want. In the end, it wasn't grand gestures or ultimatums that settled it, but something quieter, a mutual, careful decision to try, because the alternative, walking away from either the opportunity or each other, felt like a wound neither of us was willing to accept without a fight. Kai took the job. I finished my final semester and applied for positions in his new city, refusing, this time, to let distance be the thing that separated us the way fear once had. The 8 months apart were hard, video calls stretched thin by time zones and exhaustion, a shared calendar marked with visits counted down like holidays, the particular ache of missing someone whose physical presence had become as necessary to me as breathing. But we made it. When I finally moved into his new apartment the following winter, our apartment, by then, neither of us treated it as a given. We had chosen each other on purpose, deliberately, through a test neither of us had asked for but both of us had survived. We did the hard thing, Kai said that first night, unpacking boxes in our new, half-furnished living room, and I'd do it again. Every time. As long as it's you on the other side of it. Some nights, we go back up to that same rooftop, the one where everything started and everything changed, back in the city where we met, whenever we visit for the holidays. We sit under the same worn blanket, watching the same skyline stretch out below us, older now, steadier, the fear that once defined so much of our beginning replaced by something calmer, something that no longer needs proving. And every single time, without fail, Kai turns to me with that same crooked grin from the very first day we met and says, "Worth the wait?" And every single time, I tell him the truth. Every second of it. Looking back now, I understand that love, the real, lasting kind, was never going to arrive fully formed and effortless. It came slowly, built out of small, deliberate choices, the choice to stay instead of run, the choice to tell the truth instead of hide behind convenient silence, the choice to keep showing up for someone even when it was hard, even when it was frightening, even when every instinct told me it would be easier to disappear back into the version of myself that never had to risk anything at all. Kai was worth every risk. He still is, every single day. And if there's anything I'd want someone else, someone sitting exactly where I once sat, terrified of a feeling they don't yet have the courage to name, to take from our story, it's this: the fear doesn't disappear before you're brave. The bravery comes first, small and shaking and uncertain, and the fear simply learns, slowly, to trust it.